In the quiet seconds between the Carpenters' songs, right after Karen's last note faded and before the applause arrived, there was always something else in the room. Not a melody, not a harmony, a tension you couldn't name unless you were living inside it. The world heard warmth, patience, and perfect control. Richard Carpenter heard all of that too, but he also heard the strain behind it, the pressure to stay spotless, the family dynamics nobody talked about, and a sister who was breaking while everyone kept asking for more. Karen Carpenter was born on March 2, 1950, in New Haven, Connecticut. Richard, born in 1946, was already treated like the family's musical miracle. Their mother, Agnes, tracked his progress obsessively. Lessons, awards, tiny achievements, building a household where Richard's talent sat at the center. Karen's gifts were real too, but the praise didn't land the same way. She was often framed as the kid making noise instead of the kid making music, and that imbalance planted something early: Karen's lifelong hunger to feel truly seen. Their father, Harold, worked steadily but modestly, and the family eventually moved west, settling in Downey, California. To Agnes, Southern California wasn't just a place to live. It was a bet on Richard's future. Karen was 13, still adjusting, and at school she felt out of place. Quiet, self-conscious, trying to disappear in a room even when she didn't want to. Then, one music class flipped everything. Karen tried different instruments, but when a drummer spot opened, she asked to sit in. Her teachers saw it immediately. Her sense of rhythm wasn't something they could teach, it was something she already had. She'd learned patterns fast, locked into swing and timing with a confidence that surprised everyone. Richard didn't hear noise. He heard a musician. At home, though, the difference in treatment stayed sharp. Richard got the best gear and the genius label. Karen kept practicing with what she could, building real skill while still feeling like she was auditioning for approval that never fully arrived. By the mid-1960s, their talent started turning into real opportunities. Richard was arranging and leading small groups while Karen, still a teenager, was drawing attention behind the drums. With a bassist friend, they formed the Richard Carpenter Trio and won the 1966 Hollywood Bowl Battle of the Bands. It brought industry attention and studio time, but the market was shifting hard toward rock, and their smooth, jazz-leaning style didn't fit what labels were chasing. The early momentum faded. That could have been the end, until Karen sang. One day, she casually sang, "I'll Be Seeing You," and Richard froze. Her voice wasn't just pretty, it had weight and tenderness at the same time, a rare emotional color that could make a room go still. Karen still thought of herself as a drummer who happened to sing. Richard heard the future. He began building arrangements that didn't just feature her voice, they protected it, framed it, made it unmistakable. They formed a new group with tight harmonies and a softer sound, and even when labels brushed them off as too gentle, Richard kept pushing. In 1969, their slowed-down, emotional take on Ticket to Ride reached Herb Alpert at A&M Records. Alpert heard something special, something different from the loudness of the era, and on April 22, 1969, the siblings signed with A&M. Their first album didn't explode, but it introduced Karen's voice to the world. Then 1970 happened. On July 25, 1970, They Long to Be Close to You hit #1, and everything accelerated. The album Close to You followed, and the fame escalated fast. Only months later, We've Only Just Begun became another defining hit. Hopeful, romantic, and so widely used it turned into a cultural soundtrack for weddings and fresh starts. The Carpenters weren't just successful. They became a symbol of clean, comforting pop in a time when the world felt loud and unsettled. But clean came with a cost. Karen was naturally private. On stage, she felt safest behind her drum kit, letting rhythm do the talking. Yet as their popularity grew, industry voices wanted her out front, closer to the audience, framed as the star. Pressure pushed her to step away from the drums for most of the show. Karen said more than once that she was a drummer who sings, but the machine kept nudging her into a role that felt exposed, standing still, smiling, singing perfectly, night after night. Inside the family, the tension tightened too. Even as Karen's voice became the public centerpiece, Agnes kept praising Richard as the real genius, the architect. Richard, for his part, carried his own pressure. He controlled song choices, arrangements, studio decisions, and the pace. The schedule was relentless. Touring, recording, TV specials. Barely any room to breathe. Richard later admitted he thought the intensity was necessary. Karen often felt like she had no control over her own life, only responsibility she couldn't refuse. As the decade moved on, Karen's health became harder to hide. She grew visibly smaller and more fragile, and the public whispered wild theories because few people understood eating disorders at the time. What many didn't recognize then is that Karen was sliding into anorexia nervosa, an illness fueled by control, anxiety, and deep self-worth wounds that fame didn't cure. Fame amplified them. Publicly, she stayed polite and bright. Privately, she was exhausted. Even moments that should have felt like validation could sting. She was recognized as a standout drummer in a major magazine poll, rare for a woman in a male-dominated space. It should have felt like victory. For Karen, it was also a reminder of what she'd been pushed away from: the drum kit, the part of performance where she felt like herself. In the late 1970s, Karen reached for independence. While Richard dealt with his own substance issues and entered rehab, Karen chased something she'd wanted for years: a solo album that sounded like her. She recorded in New York with producer Phil Ramone, exploring new styles and a more grown, confident tone. People who heard it felt she'd unlocked a side of herself the Carpenters' image wouldn't allow: looser, bolder, less perfect. Karen was excited. She talked about new beginnings and the idea of building a life that wasn't constantly filtered through family expectations. Then she played the album for Richard and the label, and the reaction crushed her. The project was shelved, judged unreleasable. To Karen, it wasn't just a professional no. It felt like the door slamming on her one attempt to become her own person. Around the same time, she tried to build a normal private life through romance. In 1980, she met Thomas James Burris, a real estate developer who seemed steady, the kind of partner Karen hoped could give her what fame never did: safety, family, children, a quiet home. The relationship moved fast. They married in August 1980. But the marriage cracked almost immediately. Karen learned Burris had no intention of giving her the family life she wanted, and friends later described her as humiliated and isolated. The relationship turned emotionally painful. The stress poured gasoline on her illness, and her health declined sharply. Karen began misusing weight loss-related medications, weakening her body further. She knew she needed help, and she did seek it: therapy, medical stabilization, repeated attempts to climb back toward health. But progress was slow, and the emotional wounds underneath didn't heal on a timetable. One moment haunted Richard for the rest of his life: a therapy session where he managed to tell Karen he loved her, but their mother couldn't bring herself to say the words Karen had waited her whole life to hear. Richard later admitted he could see in real time what that silence did to Karen. There were flickers of hope. In December 1982, Karen visited a school and sang Christmas carols: small, gentle, heartfelt. In January 1983, she attended a Grammy-related celebration and seemed for a moment lighter, smiling, joking, letting friends believe she might actually be turning a corner. She spoke with Richard about future plans. The future briefly sounded possible again. Then, on February 4th, 1983, Karen collapsed at her parents' home in Downey. She was rushed to the hospital, but she was pronounced dead that morning, only 32 years old. The cause was heart failure linked to long-term complications from her eating disorder and medication misuse, damage that had built quietly over years. For Richard, the loss became a permanent echo. He later admitted he'd seen signs but didn't understand how deep the spiral went or how to stop it. He carried grief and guilt like unfinished music: no resolution, no chord that lands. Living without Karen felt, in his words, like losing a piece of himself, because she wasn't just his sister, she was the human heart inside the precision. After her death, Richard didn't just mourn her, he protected her. He remastered recordings, approved releases, and tried to keep the public memory focused on her artistry, not just the tragedy. And years later, he did something that felt like both an apology and a gift. He finally allowed Karen's shelved solo work with Phil Ramone to be released in 1996, giving listeners a bittersweet glimpse of what she might have become if she'd been allowed more freedom and had more time. Karen Carpenter's voice still stops people in their tracks. Warm, intimate, instantly recognizable. But the full story is harder than the music. It's a story about talent colliding with pressure, about a young woman who made the world feel safe while she didn't feel safe inside herself, and about an older brother who spent decades carrying the quiet truth of how complicated their success really was. If you're still here, hit subscribe so you don't miss the next story, because these legacies deserve more than headlines. And I'm curious, which Carpenter song hits you the hardest? And do you hear it differently knowing what Karen was fighting behind the sound? Drop your thoughts in the comments. Hit like if this story moved you, and don't forget to subscribe for more Golden Age deep dives.